From Khamzat Chimaev putting his friendship with Darren Till before anything else, to Nate Diaz calling the UFC out for disrespecting the entire game. Here's a look at the times UFC stars refused to fight others. It's not every day that fighters say no to a great fight, but when they do, boy, are you never gonna forget about it. Just like Khamzat Chimaev versus Darren Till. This one goes back to when Borz was fighting in the welterweight division. Of course, he made a huge name for himself as soon as he signed into the promotion, but little did he think that he'd have to go up against Darren Till. But why is that such a big deal for him? It's not like he's the baddest fighter out there. Like, come on, Khamzat could probably take him down in an instant. But the only reason he didn't is because they're the best of friends. I mean, Darren's on his side of the ring in almost all of his fights, so obviously we all should have seen this one coming. Not just that, but the fighter even talked about it in an interview, saying that he would never fight with a friend. But Darren, on the other hand, said that he wouldn't think twice about it after taking a look at the money they'd be making. But of course, all of this was just banter, because these two really have a lot of respect for each other, and nothing can ever turn them into opponents. But while Till and Chimaev have found friends in the game, most fighters can't really stand each other. The best example of that has to be Miesha Tate versus Aspen Ladd. Here's a fight that everyone's been looking forward to for a while now. Why's that? Well, who could forget about that insane beef between these two? All because Ladd wasn't able to cut down enough weight for her fight against Macy Chesson back in 2021. So what did Tate do even though the whole situation wasn't really about her? Obviously, she went on Twitter to talk smack about the fighter, saying that what really pisses her off about Ladd is that she tried to come up with a million excuses, all to cover up for being a slob. Heck, she even called her a cheater. And the whole thing led to a bunch of fans roasting Ladd all over the internet, which of course forced her to respond, with the fighter telling everyone that it was because of her period starting just 2 days before the fight. Talk about never-ending drama! That entire beef kept going until they finally got a chance to settle things in the ring. But this time, Tate rejected the fight. Why's that? Because there's no way that she's gonna spend months training for a bout just so her opponent can drop out a few days before they're supposed to fight again. But that's not all. She's not signing on for any fights against Aspen until she gets it all together. So, while these two are still clapping back at each other every now and then, it doesn't look like they're going up against each other in real life anytime soon. That's just how crazy the women's division can be at times. Just take Ronda Rousey versus Chris Cyborg, for instance. It's been years, and fans are still dying to see these two smash each other's faces in. But every single time, something happens and you're left disappointed. So what's stopping them from an actual fight? Well, turns out that Ronda just isn't in the mood for it. But it's not like there haven't been times when they weren't close to it. Back when she was the bantamweight champion, it really looked like it could happen. Though the terms for it were just bad news for her. And you'd think that too if you were in her place. I mean, imagine being the reigning champ and still having to drop down weight to fight in another division. Shouldn't it be the opposite? Chrissy should have been the one gaining or losing weight for the fight. Just think about it. Who in their right mind would give up a chance at another championship just to train intensely for months to change their division and then put in so much effort again to get back in their own division? That's not all. She'd have to train for a completely different fighting style too, so those cons just keep racking up. Plus, Cyborg's had some serious steroid controversies in the past, and no one's going to be putting in so much effort for an opponent that risky. Ronda would have been fighting at a huge disadvantage. Steroids really nailed the coffin down for everyone here. But that's not the only time those pesky substances have stopped a legendary fight from happening. Georges St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. Anyone? Even now, tons of fans out there are devastated that this one's never gonna happen. I mean, both of them are living legends, and they've set records most fighters couldn't even dream of taking a shot at, let alone breaking. So when news about a fight between these two started making rounds for UFC 186, you'd think that they'd never pass up on that, finally showing everyone who's the best while getting some pretty crazy money out of it. So why'd they keep on saying no? Well, turns out it was another one of those steroid abuse cases, and this time Silva was at the butt of it. And if you're wondering how it all happened, basically, The fighter had recently been suspended because of the same reason, so good old Georgie was not gonna risk his reputation for a fluke. And I'm sure none of you would have either if you were in his shoes. Plus, he was pretty busy with some of his other projects at the time, so that just became another reason. And let's be honest, drug abuse was turning into a pretty big deal back then, so almost every fighter was playing it safe. Fast forward to now, and it doesn't seem like it's ever gonna happen. Because while Silva's still in the game, Joe's put his MMA days behind him. Now he's more interested in acting, and it doesn't look like he will change his mind. And another legendary fight that's gone down the same route is Jon Jones versus Chael Sonnen. Let's go back to UFC 151 for this one, the time when Bones was almost up against Dan Henderson. Though Danny dropped out right on the 11th hour, because turns out that he'd been practicing a little too hard. I mean, it makes sense who'd want to go up against Jones unprepared. But that led to him injuring his knee just a few days before the actual fight. So, the UFC had to come up with a quick replacement. They couldn't just have a year without a fight for the title now, could they? And guess who they ring up first thing? You got that right, it was none other than Chael Sonnen. I bet they were seeing dollar signs even before they actually hit him up. Of course, the American gangster was all in for it, and everything seemed to be going great. The fans were excited, the promotion didn't have to cancel a fight. What could go wrong, right? Turns out Jones wasn't so chill with the whole thing, and after talking about it with his coaches, he refused the offer, to everyone's shock. I mean, what could have possibly made him give up on the fight of a lifetime? Well, the answer is that his coaches just didn't think he'd gotten enough training to go up against Sonnen. And while he definitely had the skill for it, he had no training for that specific fighter. And this fight could have easily become the biggest mistake of his career. Which makes sense honestly, why put everything on the line when you're not even ready for the fight? Though unlike Jones, a lot of young fighters are gonna risk it all for glory, but sometimes they go a little overboard. Remember Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev? Trust me when I say that this was one of the most controversial refusals ever. There's not a single person out there who doesn't remember Diaz publicly bashing the UFC. But before I get into that, what really happened? Did he just wake up one day and choose violence? Nope. The fighter was on his last fight before his contract was gonna end, so instead of putting him in the cage with someone who's just as skilled, they signed on Khamzat Chimaev, who's not an amateur in any way, but had nowhere near enough fights under his belt. No one wanted to see this fight, so why'd they even try to make it happen? Did they think that Diaz winning his last fight would bring in all the money? Because that's just not fair. So it's no surprise that the fighter was having none of it. He even went on to TMZ to talk about how the whole thing was disrespectful to the entire sport. And well, I don't blame him. So, from Nate Diaz calling the UFC out for being disrespectful to Khamzat Chimaev refusing to fight his brother in arms. This was a look at the times UFC stars refused to fight others.